Screaming is a luxury on Phaedros. The first colonists learned that when their throats sealed shut 3 weeks after planetfall, not from disease or poison, but because something in the air decided vocal cords were no longer necessary for the work ahead. They clawed at their necks until their fingers bled, wrote desperate messages on the walls of their hab units, banged metal against metal in patterns that might have been words if anyone had bothered to listen. But the Adeptus officials who arrived on the second wave simply recorded the phenomenon in their data slates, classified it as an acceptable mutation rate, and continued with the surveys. By the time children were born on that world, silence had become the only language that mattered. These children never cried when they entered the world. They emerged from their mothers with eyes already open, already searching, already aware that sound was a betrayal of whatever purpose had been carved into their genes before they took their first breath. The planet orbits a dying red giant in the segmentum obscurus, far enough from the light of the Astronomicon that navigators whisper prayers before making the jump, far enough that even the Vox channels crackle with static that sounds almost like screaming if you listen too closely. The surface is gray, not the gray of stone or metal, but the gray of something that has forgotten what color it used to be. The cities sprawl across continents in geometric patterns that make no sense from orbit, spiraling outward in fractals that hurt to perceive for more than a few seconds. Pilots who stare too long at the planetary maps report headaches that last for weeks, dreams of walking through corridors that twist back on themselves, of doors that open into rooms they just left. The administratum clerks who process the tithes from Phaedros do so in shifts no longer than 4 hours, and they are never allowed to work on the planet's files 2 days in a row. No one asks why. In the Imperium, there are 10,000 worlds where questions die in your throat before you can give them voice, where curiosity is a sin catalogued and punished, where the only wisdom is obedience. Phaedros is one of those worlds, except here the questions do not die, they metastasize. They grow roots in your mind and spread like cancer through your thoughts until you cannot remember what you wanted to ask in the first place, only that the asking has hollowed you out and filled the space with something else. The Inquisition maintains a watch station in the outer system, a black fortress that never responds to hails and never docks at the orbital platforms. Its guns are always charged. Its targeting augers are always active. 3 times in recorded history, ships have tried to leave Phaedros without proper clearance. 3 times, the watch station has reduced those ships to expanding clouds of vapor and frozen blood. No warnings, no negotiations, just annihilation, clean and absolute. The people of Phaedros know this. They know because they can feel it, the same way you might feel a predator watching you from the darkness. They go about their lives with the kind of mechanical precision that marks those who have accepted their damnation and found peace in the acceptance. They work in the manufactorums that produce nothing anyone can identify. Great cathedral-sized structures where millions of workers assemble components that defy easy classification. Some look like weapons. Some look like medical devices. Some look like both and neither. Metal and flesh fused in configurations that seem designed to cause maximum psychological distress to anyone who sees them. The workers do not know what they are building. They do not ask. They simply follow the patterns burned into their nervous systems. Their hands moving in sequences they do not remember learning, their eyes focused on tasks they will forget the moment their shift ends. Memory is currency on Phaedros, and like all currency in the Imperium, it flows upward. The Adeptus facilities scattered across the planet structures with no names, only designation codes that change every standard year harvest recollections the way other worlds harvest promethium or ore. They take them from the living and the dead with equal efficiency. The process is not gentle. Those selected for extraction are brought to buildings that hum with a frequency just below human hearing, a vibration that makes your teeth ache and your vision blur at the edges. Inside, they are strapped to tables of black iron and connected to machines that look like they were grown rather than built. All organic curves and pulsing veins of copper wire. Needles slide into skulls with surgical precision, finding the exact points where consciousness meets matter, where thought becomes electric impulse. What happens next depends on what the Adeptus needs that day. Sometimes they take specific memories, a face, a name, the feeling of sunlight on skin before Phaedros became what it is now. Sometimes they take everything, scooping out the contents of a mind like someone emptying a bucket, leaving behind a shell that can still walk and breathe and perform simple tasks, but has forgotten that it was ever anything more than meat. The emptied ones are sent to the lowest levels of the manufactorums, where they work until their bodies fail, never sleeping because they have forgotten what sleep is, never eating more than the nutrient paste forced down their throats because they have forgotten hunger. When they finally collapse, servitors collect the bodies and process them into component parts. Nothing is wasted on Phaedros. Even death is just another form of service. But the Imperium does not harvest memories for cruelty alone. Cruelty is a byproduct, an acceptable margin of suffering in pursuit of something greater. The recollections taken from Phaedros are shipped off-world in containers lined with psychically reactive materials, crystals that glow with a sick purple light, metals that feel warm to the touch, even in the void of space. Where these containers go is classified at levels that make even inquisitors hesitate. Some whisper they are taken to Terra itself, to vaults beneath the Imperial palace, where the collected experiences of billions are stored and analyzed, fed into cogitators the size of hive cities, processed by minds that have not known humanity for millennia. Others claim the memories are weapons, that somewhere in the galaxy there are soldiers who fight with stolen lives burned into their neurons, who move with the muscle memory of 1,000 dead warriors, who kill with the efficiency of those who have forgotten they were ever anything but killers. The truth, as it often is in the Imperium, is worse than either rumor. The memories are tools of ascension. On Phaedros, the boundary between human and something beyond human is not a line but a gradient, and the Adeptus have been moving their subjects along that gradient for 800 years. The process begins in childhood. When a child turns 7 on Phaedros, they are brought to the central spire of their city, a needle of black stone that rises 30 kilometers into the atmosphere and descends even deeper into the planet's crust. There are no windows in the spire. There are no doors that open from the inside. Parents release their children at the entrance and walk away without looking back. Because looking back is forbidden. Because looking back has consequences that are never explained but always understood. Inside the spire, the children are tested, not for intelligence or physical fitness, but for something the Adeptus calls resonance. They are placed in chambers where the walls are inscribed with symbols that predate the Imperium, geometric patterns that seem to shift when you are not looking directly at them, script in languages that have not been spoken since before mankind crawled out of old Earth's gravity well. Some children scream when they see the symbols, even though their vocal cords have been sealed since birth. Scream with their minds, their terror broadcast on frequencies that make the attendants' noses bleed. These children are taken deeper into the spire, to levels where the air is thick with incense that smells like burnt copper and rotting flowers, where the temperature drops until frost forms on exposed skin, where the only sound is a distant thrumming that might be machinery or might be something else. The children who do not scream, who stand before the symbols with empty faces and emptier eyes, are returned to their families. They go back to their lives in the manufactorums and the agri-complexes, back to the grey existence that is all Phaedros offers to those deemed unremarkable. But something has changed in them. They move differently, speak differently in the sign language that has replaced verbal communication on the planet. They avoid mirrors. They do not sleep in darkness anymore, always keeping a small lumen strip burning beside their beds, because darkness on Phaedros is not the absence of light but the presence of something else, something that watches and waits and occasionally reaches out to touch those who have been marked by the spire. The children who screamed never return. Their families receive notification of their reassignment, a brief data pulse that provides no details and answers no questions. Some parents try to investigate, try to find where their children have gone, but those attempts always end the same way. The investigators disappear. Sometimes their bodies are found days later in places they could not possibly have reached. Bodies that show no signs of violence but have been drained of every drop of fluid, dried out like ancient parchment, skin pulled tight over bones that have become hollow and brittle. Sometimes the investigators are found alive but changed, walking through the streets with that same empty expression as the servitors, responding to questions with silence or with answers that make no grammatical sense, strings of words that sound like language but convey no meaning. Fear is the baseline emotion on Phaedros. Not panic, not terror, but a low-level dread that permeates every moment of existence like radiation, slowly poisoning hope and replacing it with resignation. The people have learned to function within this fear, to treat it as a natural condition of life the way someone might treat chronic pain or tinnitus. They marry, they have children, they celebrate holy days with the mandatory devotion required by the ecclesiarchy. But their celebrations are hollow. Their prayers are recited by rote, words worn smooth by repetition until they have no meaning beyond the act of speaking them. When missionaries from other worlds arrive on Phaedros, they report a profound wrongness in the population's faith, a sense that the people are praying to something but it is not the emperor, or perhaps it is the emperor but they are praying to a version of him that does not exist anywhere else in the Imperium. The planet's tithe is unusual. Other worlds send soldiers, food, raw materials, but Phaedros sends psykers. Not the wild, untrained wretches that are rounded up by the black ships across the galaxy, but something refined, something cultivated with the patience of a gardener breeding roses. Every year, when the tithe fleet arrives, 10,000 individuals are marched up the boarding ramps of the transport ships. They range in age from 8 to 80, but they all share certain characteristics. Their eyes have a milky quality, as if cataracts have begun to form, but their vision is perfect. Their skin is cold to the touch, regardless of the ambient temperature. They do not react to pain in conventional ways, cut them, and they will watch the blood flow with mild curiosity but no distress. Most disturbing is their silence. Even when released from the vocal cord suppression that affects most of Phaedros's population, they choose not to speak. They communicate through other means, through slight movements of their hands, through the tilt of their heads, through methods that observers cannot quite define but somehow understand. These psykers are taken to facilities scattered across the Imperium, to training grounds where they are molded into weapons. But they are not like other sanctioned psykers. They do not channel the warp with the desperate, barely controlled fury of those who have been soul-bound to the Emperor or lobotomized into compliance. Instead, they use their abilities with surgical precision, as if psychic power is not a curse or a gift, but a tool, something to be picked up and set down as needed. Battlefield reports describe them walking through enemy fire without shields, bullets and las bolts passing through empty space where the psykers were standing a microsecond before. They kill without gestures or incantations, simply looking at their targets and willing them to cease. Hearts stop, brains hemorrhage, lungs fill with fluid that materializes from nowhere. The Ordo Malleus has studied these psykers extensively, searching for signs of chaos corruption, for the taint that inevitably marks those who touch the warp. They find nothing. Or rather, they find something, but it does not match any known pattern of corruption. The Phaedros psykers are clean in the way that a surgical instrument is clean, sterilized and perfect and utterly without warmth. Daemon hosts recoil from them. Warp entities that would normally revel in the presence of psykers avoid the Phaedros trained, as if they carry a contagion, a sickness that even the denizens of the Immaterium fear. Inquisitors have theorized that whatever process occurs in the spires of Phaedros does not open the subjects to the warp, but instead seals them off from it in some fundamental way, creating psykers who draw power from a different source entirely. What that source might be is a question that has ended careers and lives. One Inquisitor, Covenant, spent 40 years investigating Phaedros, assembling a team of scholars and warriors, pulling favors and spending political capital to gain access to restricted archives. Her final report, delivered to the inquisitorial conclave on Scintilla, lasted 4 hours and left 3 senior inquisitors catatonic. The report was sealed immediately, all copies destroyed except for one kept in a vault that requires the authorization of 5 Lord Inquisitors to open. Covenant herself vanished 2 weeks after delivering the report. Her last known location was a passenger ship bound for the Segmentum Obscurus. The ship arrived at its destination with all passengers and crew accounted for except Covenant. Her quarters were found locked from the inside, empty except for a single message written on the wall in what forensic analysis confirmed was her own blood. The message read, "They are not teaching them to touch the warp. They are teaching them to remove themselves from reality one piece at a time. When enough pieces are gone, What remains is a hole, and holes can be used. The spires on Phaedros are not training facilities. They are excavation sites. Beneath each one, tunnels descend through kilometers of rock and metal, passing through geological strata that should not exist, layers of sediment that contain fossils of creatures that never evolved on any world in Imperial records. The deepest excavations have reached chambers that predate human settlement by millions of years. Vast spaces carved from the living rock with a precision that no known technology can match. The walls of these chambers are covered in the same symbols that line the upper levels of the spires, but here they are larger, each one the size of a titan, glowing with a faint bioluminescence that makes them seem alive. Stand in front of one of these symbols for more than a few minutes, and you will begin to understand things you should not understand. Cosmological truths that human minds are not equipped to process. The Adeptus teams that work in these depths wear specialized cogitators grafted directly to their frontal lobes, artificial intelligence that filters perception and prevents understanding, because understanding is death. What the symbols mean, what they represent, remains classified, but the effects are measurable. Psykers brought into proximity with the deep chambers experience spontaneous evolution of their abilities. A telepath who could barely read surface thoughts suddenly finds herself capable of perceiving the mental states of everyone within a kilometer radius. A pyrokine who struggled to light a candle discovers he can ignite the atmosphere itself, turning air into plasma with a thought. But these enhanced abilities come with a price. The psykers begin to lose pieces of themselves, fragments of personality and memory that simply cease to exist. They forget their names first, then their histories, then the basic concepts that define human existence. Ask one of these enhanced psykers what joy is, and they will stare at you with incomprehension, not because they have forgotten the feeling, but because the concept itself has become alien to them, a word with no referent in their experience. The Imperium calls this process ascension. On Phaedros, they have a different term, one that is never spoken aloud but appears in the sealed data logs and encrypted Vox transmissions: hollowing. The people of Phaedros are being hollowed out, their humanity excavated and replaced with something else, something that can serve the Imperium's purposes more efficiently than flesh and faith ever could. The process is slow, incremental, designed to take generations, but it is accelerating. Observers who have visited Phaedros multiple times over the course of decades report that the changes are becoming more pronounced, more rapid. Children who a century ago would have taken years to develop psychic abilities now manifest them within months of their testing. The vocal cord suppression that once affected only adults now appears in infants. The gray color of the cities is spreading, creeping into the flesh of the population itself, their skin taking on that same lifeless hue, their eyes fading to match the buildings and streets around them. Some believe that Phaedros is an experiment in creating the perfect imperial citizen, a being that serves without question, without desire, without any of the weaknesses that make humanity vulnerable to chaos. Others believe something darker, that the planet is a prototype, a proof of concept for a transformation that will eventually be applied to the entire Imperium, a slow metamorphosis that will turn mankind into something that can survive the horrors of the galaxy by becoming horror itself. The truth, as recorded in documents that exist in only one location in the entire Imperium, in a vault beneath a facility that has no name and no official existence, is that Phaedros is both and neither. It is a bridge, a transition point between what humanity is and what it might become if every shred of mercy and compassion and individuality is burned away in the name of survival. The Emperor, according to orthodox imperial doctrine, protects, but protection comes in many forms, and some forms of protection are indistinguishable from destruction. The faithful on Phaedros believe, with the fervor of the truly devoted, that what is happening to them is necessary, that their suffering serves a higher purpose, that in 10,000 years when the galaxy has been scoured clean of every Xenos threat, and every heretic has been burned and every daemon has been banished, their descendants, if descendants is even the right word for what they will become, will stand at the Emperor's side and understand why this was necessary. They believe this because the alternative is acknowledging that they are being sacrificed not for victory but for data. that every mind broken and every memory harvested is just another data point in an experiment whose ultimate goal is so far beyond their comprehension that knowing it would shatter whatever sanity they have left. The Administratum classifies Phaedros as a forge world, which is a lie. It classifies it as a shrine world, which is a lie. It classifies it as a death world, which is closer to the truth but still misses the essential nature of what Phaedros has become. There is no proper classification for a world that is simultaneously alive and dead, populated and empty, loyal and lost. The clerks who maintain the records have simply created a new category, a designation that appears nowhere else in the Imperium's vast bureaucracy. Threshold world. When asked what that means, the clerks will tell you it refers to worlds standing on the threshold of compliance, worlds that are in transition between rebellion and loyalty. This is another lie. Threshold refers to something else entirely, to the concept of a doorway, a passage between one state of being and another. Phaedros is not a world. Phaedros is a door, and something is on the other side, waiting to come through. The soldiers who garrison the planet know this. The Astra Militarum regiments assigned to Phaedros serve abbreviated tours, 6 months standard instead of the usual deployments that can last decades. Psychologists who debrief returning soldiers report a constellation of symptoms that defy standard psychiatric categories. The soldiers speak of dreams where they are walking through cities that are simultaneously Phaedros and somewhere else, somewhere colder and darker and more geometrically perfect. They speak of hearing voices in languages they do not recognize, of seeing figures in the distance that vanish when approached, of feeling watched every moment of every day by something that exists just outside the range of human perception. Most disturbing are the soldiers who report feeling relief when they leave Phaedros, relief not because they are escaping danger but because they are escaping temptation, because something about the planet called to them, promised them something they cannot name, offered them a transformation they found themselves wanting despite knowing it would destroy everything they were. Desertion rates from Phaedros garrison duty are zero, not low, not manageable, but zero. This is not because the soldiers are particularly loyal or because the military discipline is especially harsh, but because something about Phaedros makes the concept of desertion impossible to conceive. You cannot abandon a place that has already claimed you, that has marked you in ways that persist even after you leave. The soldiers return to their regiments and resume their duties, but they are changed. Their commanding officers report that Phaedros veterans are more efficient, more obedient, more willing to accept orders that would make other soldiers hesitate. They also report that these veterans die more frequently in combat, not because they lack skill, but because they take risks that suggest a fundamental misunderstanding of mortality, as if death is not an end but a transition, another threshold to cross. The space above Phaedros is thick with debris, centuries of accumulated waste from the orbital facilities and the ships that service them. But mixed in with the standard detritus of human occupation, discarded fuel pods, construction materials, frozen sewage are objects that should not be there. Salvage crews have reported finding structures floating in the debris field, impossible geometries of metal and crystal that seem to have grown rather than been built, that pulse with a rhythmic light that makes auger screens flicker and fail. Some of these objects are clearly ancient, predating human presence in the system by millions of years. Others appear to be new, forming spontaneously from the debris itself, matter rearranging according to patterns that defy physics as the Adeptus Mechanicus understands it. The Inquisition has ordered all such objects destroyed on sight, but the destruction itself is problematic. When hit with macro-cannon fire or lance strikes, the structures do not explode or vaporize, but instead seem to unfold, their wreckage spreading through the debris field in fractal patterns, each fragment containing a perfect miniature of the original structure. On the surface, in the cities where millions labor in silence, life continues with the rhythmic inevitability of a heartbeat. The people of Phaedros wake at the appointed hour, consume their ration of nutrient paste, proceed to their assigned tasks. They work for 12 hours without break, their bodies sustained by stimulants pumped into the air, their minds focused on repetitive tasks that require no thought. When the work period ends, they return to their hab units, consume another ration, and sleep for 8 hours in rooms that are never quite dark, never quite quiet. On rest days, they attend mandatory services in cathedrals that are too large and too empty, where priests recite liturgies in voices that echo strangely, where the Imperial Aquila on the walls seems to watch with eyes that are too knowing, too aware. The priests of Phaedros are themselves a subject of quiet concern among the broader ecclesiarchy. They are trained off-world, selected from the most devoted and unquestioning faithful, sent to Phaedros with the understanding that their service will be brief, that no one remains a priest on that world for more than 5 years. But something about Phaedros changes them faster than anticipated. Within months of arrival, they begin to incorporate phrases into their sermons that appear in no approved liturgy, speaking of the emperor not as a distant god figure, but as something more immediate, more present, as if he walks among the congregation wearing the faces of the faithful. They speak of transformation and transcendence, of a future where humanity will shed its weakness like a snake shedding skin, where the distinction between flesh and machine and spirit will dissolve into something unified and perfect. The congregations listen with blank faces, absorbing the words without reaction. But afterwards those who attended the sermons work with increased efficiency, as if the priest's words have optimized something in their neural architecture. Every year, delegations from the Adeptus Terra arrive on Phaedros to assess the progress of what is officially termed the Psychic Development Initiative. These delegations consist of senior officials from multiple imperial organizations: the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, the Officio Assassinorum, representatives of the Inquisition, and occasionally members of organizations so classified that even their existence is debated. They descend into the spires, walk through the deep chambers, observe the testing of children and the extraction of memories and the training of psykers who have been hollowed out and filled with purpose. The delegations leave detailed reports that are sealed immediately upon submission, reports that supposedly contain recommendations for expanding or modifying the initiative. But analysis of resource allocation and personnel assignments suggests that the recommendations are always the same: continue, accelerate, prepare for implementation on additional worlds. There is a list, though no official record of this list exists, and mentioning it is grounds for immediate investigation. The list contains the names of 300 worlds, planets selected for their populations, their strategic locations, their psychic resonance. Some believe that Phaedros is the first, the prototype, and that the lessons learned there will be applied to all 300 worlds simultaneously in a coordinated transformation that will reshape the Imperium from within. Others believe the list is a contingency, a plan to be implemented only if humanity faces extinction, a final desperate measure that will ensure survival at the cost of everything that makes survival meaningful. The truth of the list, like so many truths in the Imperium, is hidden beneath layers of classification and misdirection, protected by individuals who believe that some knowledge is too dangerous to exist, that some questions will destroy those who ask them. But Phaedros does not care about lists or plans or the grand designs of Terra. Phaedros simply continues, day after day, year after year, grinding its population down and reshaping them into something else. The planet is patient. It has time. The cities spread slowly across the continents. The spires dig deeper into the crust. The symbols in the deep chambers grow brighter and more numerous. Some nights, when the atmospheric conditions are right, people on Phaedros look up at the sky and see lights moving between the stars, patterns that are too regular to be natural, too complex to be human-made. The lights trace geometries in the darkness, equations written in fire and shadow. No one knows what the lights are. No one asks. On Phaedros, curiosity has been bred out of the population as thoroughly as any genetic defect, replaced by acceptance and obedience and a hollow faith that sustains without nourishing. The children still do not dream. That has not changed in 800 years. But something new has emerged in the past century, something that the Adeptus monitors carefully but cannot fully explain. The children have begun to share experiences, not through communication but through something more fundamental. A child in one city will learn a new task, and within days children across the planet will perform that same task with identical efficiency, despite having no contact with the original learner. Memories no longer belong to individuals but circulate through the population like data through a network, accessible to anyone who needs them. The boundaries between minds are becoming permeable, dissolving like salt in water. The Adeptus believes this is an evolutionary response to the environment they have created, a psychic adaptation that improves efficiency and control. But some of the researchers, in moments of weakness when they believe no one is listening, wonder if it is not evolution but infection, if something from the deep chambers is spreading through the population, using human minds as substrate for its own incomprehensible purposes. Pain still exists on Phaedros, but it has become abstract. Cut yourself and you will feel the nerve signals reporting damage, but the emotional response that normally accompanies injury is absent. You will treat the wound with appropriate care, not because you wish to avoid suffering, but because maintaining the integrity of your body is logically necessary for continued function. Pleasure has similarly abstracted, reduced to the brief satisfaction of completing a task, or the mild positive reinforcement delivered through the neurochemical regulators implanted in every citizen. Love is a concept discussed in historical texts, analyzed as a primitive emotional state that once bonded humans together, but has been superseded by more efficient organizational structures. Parents on Phaedros care for their children with mechanical precision, ensuring they are fed and sheltered and prepared for testing, but the instinctive emotional connection that characterizes parent-child relationships elsewhere in the Imperium simply does not exist. Or perhaps it exists but has been redirected, channeled toward the Emperor and the Imperium, and the abstract concept of humanity's survival, spread so thin across so many objects of devotion that it becomes invisible. The grey cities grow. Every decade, new construction begins on the outskirts, massive projects that employ millions, and produce structures whose purposes are never explained. These buildings rise quickly, assembled by workers who move with perfect coordination, as if they are following blueprints burned directly into their nervous systems. The architecture defies conventional aesthetics, all sharp angles and recursive patterns, surfaces that seem to shift when viewed peripherally, doorways that lead to rooms larger than the buildings that contain them. Some of these structures are designated as habitation, others as industrial facilities, but most are simply left unmarked, empty spaces waiting to be filled with whatever the Imperium decides they need. The planet's population continues to grow despite conditions that should suppress reproduction. Despite the fact that most people on Phaedros die before reaching 40, their bodies worn out by stimulants and stress, and the cumulative effects of the psychic resonance that saturates the environment. The population grows because it must, because the initiative requires a constant supply of subjects, because Phaedros is a machine, and machines need fuel. In the deepest chambers, where the largest symbols glow with light that exists in spectrums human eyes cannot perceive, something is happening. The Adeptus researchers who work at these depths report that the symbols are changing, not in form but in intensity, as if they are warming up, preparing for some function they were always designed to perform. The temperature in the deep chambers has risen 3 degrees over the past century, a small change but one that is accelerating. The thrumming sound that permeates the depths has increased in frequency, climbing from subsonic into the range where human ears can just barely detect it. And the chambers themselves have begun to expand. New passages opening in walls that scans confirm are solid rock, new rooms appearing overnight in areas that were thoroughly mapped days before. The researchers document everything, fill their data slates with measurements and observations, but they are operating without a theoretical framework, because what is happening on Phaedros does not match any known phenomenon. They are mapping the unknown with tools designed for the familiar. And the results are categories that make no sense, numbers that contradict each other, conclusions that unravel the moment you examine them closely. The Imperium, vast and ancient and terrible in its patience, watches Phaedros the way a physician might watch a patient during an experimental treatment, monitoring for signs of improvement or catastrophic failure. The world represents an investment measured not in thrones or resources but in human potential, in the possibility that there is a path forward through the horrors of the galaxy that does not require mankind to remain human in any recognizable sense. This is the final, unspoken truth of Phaedros. It is not an atrocity, though by any moral standard it is monstrous. It is not a mistake, though it produces suffering on a scale that defies quantification. It is a choice, A deliberate decision made by individuals who believe they are saving humanity by destroying it piece by piece, by testing how much can be removed before the essential core collapses, by pushing the boundaries of what human means until the word itself becomes obsolete. The people of Phaedros do not know they are being sacrificed, or perhaps they know but lack the emotional capacity to care. They continue their lives, silent and grey and efficient, moving through days that blur into years, raising children who are less human than they were, watching those children become something else entirely. They do not question. They do not rebel. They serve. And in serving they fulfill the function that was chosen for them 800 years ago, when the first colonists arrived and found their voices stolen, and their dreams erased, and their world transformed into a laboratory where the Imperium conducts its cruelest experiments, not on Xenos or heretics, but on the faithful themselves. On Terra, in rooms that do not officially exist, the reports from Phaedros are read and analyzed. Decisions are made. Resources are allocated. And somewhere in those endless deliberations, someone makes the recommendation that has been anticipated for centuries. Expand the initiative. Select the next world. Begin the process again. The Imperium is vast, and it has learned that when one experiment succeeds, the proper response is not celebration but replication. 300 worlds on a list. 300 chances to see if humanity can be saved by being hollowed out and refilled with purpose. 300 laboratories where people will wake one day to find their voices gone and their dreams erased, and their world transforming into something grey and terrible and perfectly loyal. Phaedros continues. The spires dig deeper, the symbols grow brighter, the children do not dream, and in the silence that has replaced all sound, in the grey that has replaced all color, in the emptiness that has replaced all emotion, something is being born. Not quickly, not violently, but with the patience of geological processes, with the inevitability of entropy. What it will be when it finally emerges, what name it will carry, what purpose it will serve, these are questions that even the architects of the initiative cannot answer with certainty. They can only watch and measure, and hope that when the transformation is complete, when Phaedros has become whatever it is becoming, the result will justify the cost. That hope is itself a lie. A story they tell themselves to make the weight of their decisions bearable, because deep in their hearts they know there is no justification, no moral calculus that balances this equation. There is only necessity, only survival, only the grim arithmetic that says one world sacrificed might save 1,000,000 others, even if that salvation comes in a form no one would recognize, even if the price of survival is becoming something that no longer deserves to survive. The Emperor, in his eternal wisdom, permits this, or so the faithful believe. Or perhaps he is unaware, trapped in his endless torment on the golden throne, his consciousness fragmented across the galaxy, unable to perceive what is done in his name. Or perhaps, in the darkest interpretation whispered only in the most heretical circles, he knows and approves, because he has seen the future and understands that mankind has only two choices: evolve into something that can endure the horrors that are coming, or perish entirely. If that interpretation is true, if the Emperor himself has sanctioned the transformation of Phaedros and the 300 worlds to follow, then what is happening is not a betrayal of humanity but its salvation, a mercy killing that preserves the species by destroying the individuals that comprise it. But such interpretations are dangerous. They suggest that the Imperium, for all its faith and fury, has already lost the war for humanity's soul. That the choice is not between survival and extinction, but between different forms of extinction, different ways of ceasing to be human. Phaedros is the proof of concept, the demonstration that it is possible to strip away everything that makes life worth living and still maintain function, still extract service, still feed the endless hunger of an Imperium that consumes worlds and souls with equal appetite. The planet is a warning and a promise that there are fates worse than death, and a promise that the Imperium will inflict those fates without hesitation if it believes survival requires it. And so Phaedros endures, silent, grey, efficient, terrible, a monument to what humanity is willing to do to itself, a laboratory where the boundaries of acceptable sacrifice are tested and expanded with each passing generation. A world where the only mercy is that those who suffer have been stripped of the capacity to understand their suffering, where the only grace is the absence of awareness, where the only salvation is the promise that their transformation serves a purpose so grand that mortal minds cannot comprehend it. The orbital stations that ring the planet are staffed by individuals who rotate through assignments with the mechanical regularity of a shift change in a manufactorum. They watch the surface through auger arrays and picked captures, monitoring for deviations from expected patterns, for signs that the initiative might be failing or mutating beyond acceptable parameters. They see the cities spreading like fungal growth across the continents. They see the spires rising higher and digging deeper. They see the millions moving through their choreographed lives with the precision of clockwork, and they see something else. Something that does not appear in their reports because they lack the vocabulary to describe it. They see a world that is forgetting it was ever anything but this, a collective amnesia, so profound that even the geological memory of the planet seems to be erasing itself, rock and soil rearranging to accommodate the new reality being imposed from above and below simultaneously. The ships that come to collect the psyker tithe arrive like clockwork, their hulls painted the black of the void, their interiors lined with psychically reactive materials that suppress the abilities of their cargo during transport. The psykers board without resistance, climbing the ramps in perfect single file, their movements synchronized in ways that suggest communication but leave no trace of psychic activity that the ship's sensors can detect. The crews watch them with a mixture of fear and revulsion, these hollow things that wear human shape but lack everything that makes humanity recognizable. Some crews refuse to speak during the transport, maintaining silence as if afraid that words might attract the attention of their cargo. Others fill the time with constant chatter, desperate jokes, and meaningless conversation. Anything to maintain the illusion of normalcy in the presence of beings that have transcended normality and landed somewhere colder and more alien than any Xenos species. The destinations of these ships are scattered across the Imperium, but patterns emerge for those with clearance to see them. A disproportionate number travel to Forge worlds, where the Adeptus Mechanicus conducts research into the intersection of psychic phenomena and machine intelligence. Others go to Shrine worlds, where the Ecclesiarchy maintains facilities dedicated to the study of faith as a weapon, where belief itself is dissected and analyzed, and rebuilt into something that can be deployed against the enemies of mankind. Still, others disappear into the dark spaces between recorded systems, heading for facilities that exist on no map, that serve purposes so classified that even knowing they exist is a death sentence for anyone without proper authorization. What unites all these destinations is a singular focus: weaponization. Everything that happens on Phaedros, every mind broken and every memory harvested and every child hollowed out, serves the goal of creating weapons. Not guns or bombs or tanks, but something more fundamental: weapons made of human potential itself, of consciousness stripped down to its most basic components and rebuilt according to specifications designed by minds that understand warfare at levels most humans cannot imagine. There are rumors, always rumors, whispered in the spaces between official communications, passed through channels that are technically secure but practically transparent to anyone who knows how to listen. The rumors say that Phaedros psykers were deployed at the siege of Moriatas, that they walked through defensive positions staffed by heretic Astra Militarum and simply unmade the defenders, erasing them from reality without violence or spectacle. The rumors say that a squad of Phaedros-trained operatives infiltrated a Genestealer cult stronghold on Delphus Sigma and rewrote the cult members' minds, turning them against their Xenos masters with such totality that they tore out their own implants and burned their own breeding chambers before taking their own lives. The rumors say that during the reclamation of the Ghoul Stars, when the Imperium encountered entities that defied categorization and resisted every conventional weapon, it was Phaedros psykers who finally achieved victory by doing something that observers described as folding space around the entities until they ceased to exist in any meaningful sense. These rumors cannot be verified. The operations they describe are classified beyond the reach of even senior inquisitors, but the rumors persist because they must, because people need to believe that the horror of Phaedros serves some purpose, that the sacrifice has meaning beyond the abstract promise of future security. The alternative that Phaedros might be an experiment with no clear endpoint, a process that will continue indefinitely because stopping would require admitting that it should never have begun, is too terrible to contemplate. So the rumors spread, growing more elaborate with each retelling, transforming the hollowed-out psykers of Phaedros into legendary figures, posthuman saviors who stand between humanity and extinction. The truth is simultaneously more mundane and more disturbing. The Phaedros psykers are effective, devastatingly so, but their effectiveness comes from their lack of humanity rather than any transcendent ability. They succeed because they cannot fail in any meaningful sense. Failure requires the capacity to care about outcomes, and that capacity was excavated from them before they left their home world. The Inquisition maintains a permanent presence on Phaedros, a fortress monastery buried 3 kilometers beneath the planet's surface, accessible only through teleportation arrays whose coordinates are changed daily. Inside this facility, inquisitors and their retinues study the population, searching for signs of chaos, corruption, or Xenos influence, for any indication that the transformation occurring on Phaedros is being guided by forces hostile to the Imperium. What they find instead is something that disturbs them more deeply than any demonic taint. They find nothing. The people of Phaedros show no signs of corruption because they show no signs of anything. They are blank spaces in the world, voids in human form, and voids cannot be corrupted any more than empty space can be poisoned. The Inquisitors document this absence with clinical precision, filling reports with descriptions of populations that register on every biological sensor but barely exist on psychic ones. People who cast shadows and leave footprints but seem to have no presence in the warp, as if they are slowly phasing out of reality entirely. This phenomenon has a name in the classified lexicons of the Ordo Malleus: ontological recession. It describes a state where entities gradually lose their connection to existence itself, becoming less real with each passing moment until they achieve a state that is neither being nor non-being but something between. The Inquisitors theorize that this is the ultimate goal of the Phaedros Initiative: to create a population that exists outside the reach of chaos because they exist outside the reach of existence itself. Such beings would be immune to corruption. By definition, you cannot corrupt what is not there. They would also be immune to conventional death, to suffering, to every weakness that makes humanity vulnerable. But they would also cease to be human in any recognizable sense, becoming instead something that merely resembles humanity, the way a pict capture resembles the person it depicts. The question that haunts the Inquisitors, that fills their private journals and encrypted communiques, is whether this transformation represents victory or defeat. If humanity survives by becoming something that is not human, can that be called survival? If the Imperium endures by transforming its citizens into hollow vessels that serve without thought or feeling, is that empire worth preserving? These are not idle philosophical questions but practical concerns with immediate implications. Because if Phaedros is the template for humanity's future, then everything the Imperium claims to fight for, the preservation of mankind, the protection of human civilization, the continuation of the species across the stars, becomes hollow mockery. The Imperium would be destroying the very thing it claims to save, committing slow genocide against its own people in the name of protecting them. But such thoughts are dangerous. They suggest doubt, and doubt is the first step toward heresy. The Inquisitors who work beneath Phaedros learn to compartmentalize their concerns, to separate their observations from their judgments, to record what they see without allowing themselves to draw conclusions about what it means. They become, in a sense, victims of the same process they study, their humanity eroded by constant exposure to its absence, their capacity for moral reasoning worn down by the need to function in an environment where morality has become obsolete. Some of them request transfer after their tours, returning to more conventional assignments with visible relief. Others remain, drawn by a fascination they cannot explain, by a need to understand what is happening on Phaedros, even if that understanding costs them everything they once were. The planet's weather has stabilized over the past 3 centuries, settling into patterns that repeat with mechanical regularity. Rain falls every 3rd day at precisely the same hour, light drizzle that lasts exactly 2 hours before stopping. The temperature fluctuates within a narrow range, never cold enough to require heating nor warm enough to cause discomfort. The wind blows from the east in the morning and the west in the evening, its speed and direction so consistent that navigation by wind direction has become standard practice among the surface population. Meteorologists cannot explain this stability. Weather is inherently chaotic, shaped by thousands of variables that should produce unpredictable outcomes. But on Phaedros, chaos has been suppressed, replaced by a regularity that suggests either massive ongoing geoengineering or something more fundamental, as if the planet itself is being trained into compliance, taught to conform to patterns that serve the initiative's purposes. The flora and fauna of Phaedros have undergone similar transformations. The native species that once populated the world have largely disappeared, replaced by organisms that are simultaneously more and less complex than their predecessors. The plants that grow in the designated agricultural zones produce exactly the nutrients required for human survival, no more and no less, their cellular structure optimized for efficient harvesting and processing. They grow in geometric patterns, perfect rows and columns that extend for kilometers, each plant identical to its neighbors, down to the cellular level. The few animals that remain serve specific functions: waste processing, soil aeration, pest control, and show no behaviors that could be classified as play or curiosity, or any of the activities that characterize living creatures elsewhere. They are biological machines, as hollow and purpose-driven as the human population they serve. Xenobiologists who study the Phaedros ecosystem in samples sent off-world report findings that border on the impossible. The genetic code of the plants and animals shows evidence of editing so extensive that almost nothing of the original organisms remains, but the editing follows no pattern consistent with any known bioengineering technique. Instead, the changes appear to be guided by mathematical principles, each modification optimizing some specific function according to equations that the xenobiologists recognize as relating to dimensional geometry and quantum mechanics rather than biology. It is as if someone is rebuilding the ecosystem, not according to biological rules, but according to physical laws that operate at scales far removed from the molecular level, as if they are treating life itself as just another form of matter to be arranged according to abstract principles of efficiency and function. The children of Phaedros continue to be born, though the process of birth itself has become clinicalized to the point of mechanical reproduction. Conception occurs in controlled environments where genetic material is screened and modified before fertilization. Embryonic development is monitored with precision that would make even the Adeptus Mechanicus envious, and birth takes place in sterile chambers where mother and child are separated immediately to prevent the formation of emotional bonds that might interfere with later processing. The children are raised in communal facilities where they receive identical nutrition, identical education, identical exposure to the environmental conditions that will shape their development. By the age of 3, they are indistinguishable from one another except by the identification codes tattooed on their wrists. By the age of 7, when they are taken to the spires for testing, they have become blank slates, ready to be inscribed with whatever purpose the initiative requires. But something is changing in the children. The Adeptus researchers have noticed a trend developing over the past generation. The children are becoming more uniform not just in behavior but in physical characteristics. Heights and weights are converging toward median values, with statistical improbability that suggests some external force is guiding their development. Eye color, once variable, has stabilized into a uniform gray that matches the cities around them. Hair texture and skin tone show similar convergence. It is as if the population is collapsing toward some ideal form, some template that represents maximum efficiency and minimum deviation. The researchers document this phenomenon with clinical detachment, noting in their reports that genetic diversity is declining at rates that should trigger biological alarms, that the population is becoming increasingly vulnerable to diseases that target specific genetic profiles. But those concerns are theoretical, distant problems that will matter only if the initiative continues for centuries more. For now, the convergence is considered a positive development, a sign that the transformation is progressing according to plan. The plan itself remains classified at the highest levels, known in full to perhaps a dozen individuals in the entire Imperium. Fragments of it can be inferred from resource allocation patterns, from the movement of personnel and material, from the subtle shifts in Imperial policy that occur over decades and centuries. Those with the knowledge and clearance to analyze these patterns have constructed models of what the plan might be, projections that extend forward thousands of years, mapping the transformation of Phaedros onto other worlds, calculating the cumulative effect of turning hundreds of planets into laboratories where humanity is refined and reduced and rebuilt. The models are disturbing in their implications. They suggest that the Imperium is preparing for a future where conventional humanity is obsolete, where the only people who survive are those who have been processed and optimized and stripped of everything that makes them individuals. They suggest a galaxy where quadrillions of humans move through their lives with the coordination of a single organism, where every thought and action serves purposes determined by intelligence so vast and cold that calling it human would be meaningless. But these models are speculation, exercises in strategic planning that may never correspond to reality. The Imperium is vast, and its plans are measured in millennia, and the distance between intention and execution is filled with countless opportunities for deviation and failure. Phaedros might be the first step in a transformation that will reshape humanity, or it might be an isolated experiment that will be quietly terminated when it has served its purpose. The people of Phaedros do not know which future awaits them, and they would not care if they did. They have been shaped into beings for whom the future is just another abstract concept, no more meaningful than the past they do not remember or the present they do not truly experience. The sun above Phaedros grows dimmer each century as it expands into its red giant phase, its light shifting toward frequencies that human eyes perceive as increasingly red. In a few millennia, the star will consume the inner planets of the system, and Phaedros itself will become uninhabitable by conventional standards. But the initiative planners have already accounted for this, designing the transformation to reach completion long before the star makes the planet unlivable. By the time Phaedros is consumed, its population will have been evacuated to other worlds, or will have transcended the need for worlds entirely, existing in states that do not require physical substrate. The sun's death is just another variable in calculations that span geological timeframes, another constraint to be acknowledged and incorporated into plans that treat human civilizations the way architects treat building materials. In the deep chambers, the symbols pulse with increasing intensity. Researchers who monitor them report that the frequency of the pulsing has begun to synchronize with observable phenomena on the surface: population movements, industrial output, even the collective biorhythms of the millions who labor above. It is as if the symbols are not merely passive inscriptions but active components of some vast machine, as if they are broadcasting signals that shape reality itself according to their geometric patterns. What those patterns mean, what they are designed to accomplish, remains unknown. But the synchronization is accelerating, the connection between the depths and the surface growing stronger with each passing year. Some researchers believe they are witnessing the activation of technology so advanced it is indistinguishable from sorcery, machinery left behind by a civilization that preceded humanity by millions of years. Others believe something darker, that the symbols are not technology at all but something alive, an intelligence that has been sleeping in the depths of Phaedros and is now waking, drawn to consciousness by the psychic resonance of millions of hollowed-out humans. The truth, as is so often the case in the Imperium, may be worse than either theory. The symbols may be both technology and life, or neither, or something that exists in categories human language cannot express. They may be the fingerprints of the old ones, the species that once shaped the galaxy before the war in heaven tore reality apart. They may be remnants of the dark age of technology, humanity's own forgotten past risen from the depths to reclaim what was built and abandoned. Or they may be something else entirely, something that has no origin because it has always existed, waiting in the spaces between dimensions for the right conditions to manifest. What matters is not what they are, but what they are doing, and what they are doing is transforming Phaedros into something that will serve as a bridge between what humanity is and what it might become. The Imperium calls this progress. It points to the psykers trained on Phaedros, to their effectiveness in combat, and their resistance to corruption, as evidence that the initiative is succeeding. It calculates the return on investment in cold economic terms, weighing the cost of maintaining the facilities and processing the population against the value of the weapons produced. By those calculations, Phaedros is a tremendous success, a model that should be replicated across every world the Imperium can spare. But economics cannot measure the cost of what is being lost, cannot quantify the value of dreams and voices, and the capacity to feel joy or grief or love. Those are externalities, factors that do not appear in the ledgers, because they cannot be converted into numbers that fit on balance sheets. And so Phaedros continues, grinding forward with the inexorability of continental drift, transforming its population one generation at a time, digging deeper into mysteries that may destroy everyone who touches them. The people work and sleep and breed and die, their lives compressed into the narrow space between utility and obsolescence. The children grow up empty and are filled with purpose that is not their own. The psykers are shipped off-world to serve in wars they do not understand against enemies they cannot hate. And beneath it all, in chambers that descend into the planet's heart, the symbols glow brighter and the patterns grow more complex, and something vast and terrible stirs in its long sleep, drawn toward waking by the resonance of millions of souls that have been carefully, methodically, lovingly hollowed out and prepared as vessels for whatever comes next. This is the price of survival in a galaxy that devours everything it touches. This is what it means to serve the Imperium of man in the 41st millennium, when mercy is weakness and compassion is heresy, and the only virtue is the willingness to sacrifice anything and anyone in the name of humanity's continued existence. Phaedros is not an aberration. It is not a mistake or an atrocity or a crime against the species. It is simply what happens when an empire built on faith and fear and the worship of a dying god decides that the only way to save humanity is to destroy it, piece by piece, until nothing remains but the will to endure and the capacity to serve. The people of Phaedros are not victims. They are pioneers, explorers, mapping territories of existence that no human has ever traversed, discovering what lies beyond the boundaries of consciousness and selfhood and all the illusions that make life bearable. In 10,000 years, when the Imperium has either conquered the galaxy or been consumed by it, when every Xenos race has been exterminated or every human world has been burned to ash, historians will look back at Phaedros and debate its significance. They will argue about whether it represented hope or horror, salvation or damnation, the best of humanity or the worst. But those debates will be academic exercises, disconnected from the reality of what happened on that grey world under its dying star. The people of Phaedros will not care about how they are remembered because they will have transcended the capacity to care about anything, will have become something so far removed from baseline humanity that memory itself is just another obsolete function, another weakness to be excised in the name of efficiency. And the Imperium will continue, as it always has, grinding forward across the centuries, consuming worlds and souls with equal appetite, serving a god who may be dead, or may be dreaming, or may be transforming into something that will make the old gods of terror look like children playing with fire. This is the legacy of Phaedros, a world that proves humanity can survive anything, including the loss of humanity itself. A world that demonstrates the Imperium's commitment to victory at any cost, where cost is measured not in thrones or lives but in the intangible qualities that separate existence from meaning. A world that stands as both warning and promise, showing what awaits any species that chooses survival over every other value, that embraces transformation without asking what will be transformed or what will remain when the transformation is complete. Phaedros endures, silent and grey and terrible, a monument to determination and a gravestone for everything that determination has killed. And somewhere in the Imperium's vast bureaucracy, in rooms where decisions are made that will echo through millennia, the names of 300 worlds are written on lists that officially do not exist, waiting for the order that will turn them all into replicas of Phaedros, 300 laboratories where the future of humanity is being written in the screams of those who can no longer scream and the dreams of those who will never dream again.